Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Economic Bulletin here on Q News. We'll bring you the latest top economic and financial stories along with expert analysis on the events and trends shaping the regional and global economy. Throughout our coverage, we spotlight key sectors and highlight the defining economic developments of the moment. But to start, we go for the latest headlines and hand you over to my colleague, Rana Assas, for the top financial stories. What do you have for us, Rana?
Thank you very much, Henny. We have a lot of stories and developments from all around the world. We start off with Europe, where the European Commission has approved Denmark's final €359 million grant payment under the Recovery and Resilience Facility, making Denmark the first EU member state to fully implement its recovery plan under the Next Generation EU. The final payment brings Denmark total funding to €1.63 billion after the country completed all requirement reforms and investments ahead of the August deadline. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the plan has helped put more than 250,000 zero-emission vehicles on Danish roads while improving home energy efficiency and supporting the country's clean energy transition. In the United Kingdom, Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has stated that the central bank is not in a position to consider cutting interest rates, despite oil prices retreating to near pre-conflict levels. Bailey said the bank could afford to wait and assess how recent energy price volatility affects the United Kingdom economy before making any policy moves. He added that forecasting energy prices remains a challenge, describing oil and gas futures as poor indicators of future price movements.
Services. So that effect hasn't been anything like, I think, what people predicted it would be.
On intercontinental trade, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between Ukraine and the United Arab Emirates has entered into force, establishing a free trade zone between both countries. According to Ukrainian's State Customs Service, the agreement eliminates custom duties, expands market access for Ukrainian exports, and strengthens bilateral trade in goods and services. The deal also provides for closer customs cooperation, including a planned mutual customs assistance agreement to enhance information sharing and combat customs violations. In Africa, Senegal's Finance Minister Sheikh Diba revealed that the government has raised the 2026 economic growth forecast to 3.2% from 2.5%, while reaffirming its commitment to fiscal discipline as it works to restore investor confidence. The budget deficit is projected to narrow to 44.9% of GDP in 2027, 3.8% in 2028, and 3.0% in 2029. Financing needs for 2027-2029 are estimated at 19.68 trillion CFA francs, or an average of 6.56 trillion CFA francs a year. Diba further noted that Senegal and the International Monetary Fund will resume debt talks by July 15 after the government uncovered about $13 billion in previously misreported debt in 2024. In commodities, oil prices fell on Wednesday as optimism over U.S.-Iran talks eased supply concerns after U.S. President Donald Trump said meetings in Qatar had gone well. Brent futures were down 2.19% to $71.35 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was down 1.74% at $69.28 a barrel. Both benchmarks were at their lowest in more than 4 months. The World Gold Council has reported that gold is entering a pivotal second half of 2026, with prices expected to be shaped by geopolitical tensions, interest rate expectations, and investor sentiment. The council said that the gold reached a record of $5,405 an ounce in January before retreating to around $4,000 in June, which remains one of the best performing assets over the past year. It expected gold to trade near $4,100 in an ounce through the end of 2026, while warning the geopolitical developments and shifts in monetary policy will remain the key drivers of prices. Gold prices rose more than 2% on Wednesday after softer than expected jobs data and remarks from Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh suggesting inflation risks has eased. Spot gold rose 2% to $4,087.21 per ounce after hitting its lowest level since November in the previous session. The yellow metal logged a quarterly loss on Tuesday. U.S. gold futures for August delivery gained 1.6% to $4,101.60. Among other metals, spot silver added 3% to $60.32 per ounce. Moving on to markets, and according to the latest financial disclosure filed with the United States Office of Government Ethics, President Donald Trump has earned more than $1.4 billion in 2025, with most of the income coming from the family's cryptocurrency ventures. The filing shows that Trump's companies received nearly $800 million from World Liberty Financial, the crypto venture he co-founded with his sons. The total included more than $520 million from crypto tokens sales and more than $250 million from the sales of stakes in the business. Trump has reported $635 million from sales of the Trump meme coin, more than $80 million from settlements with various media companies, and $52 million from licensing his name.
Very good meetings, and we'll see. We hit them very hard for 3 nights, as you know. But we're getting along very well, so I call it the denuclearization.
And finally, global markets showed mixed performance across all indices in the United States. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.36%. The S&P 500 edged up 0.04%. Meanwhile, the Nasdaq lost 0.36%. In Europe, Germany's DAX led regionally gains, rising 0.18%, while the United Kingdom's FTSE 100 was down 0.18%, and France's CAC 40 sank 0.79%. Across Asia, Japan's Nikkei advanced 0.59%, China's Shanghai Composite gained 0.44%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index slipped 0.63%. Hani, as you mentioned, these were the economic top stories for the hour. We now move on to you again in the studios. Hani?
Thank you, Rana. Ladies and gentlemen, for more discussion, now let's look at the European Central Bank, who's considering a proposal that could reshape how banks manage their liquidity. While the ECB says the move would help absorb excess liquidity and support its policy framework, critics warn it could weigh on bank profitability and lending. What's really at stake then for Europe's banking sector and economy? Let's take a closer look. Reuters has reported that the European Central Bank is considering raising the bank's minimum reserve requirement from 1% to 2% of customer deposits and certain liabilities. Now, the proposal would require lenders to hold more funds in non-interest-bearing accounts, reducing the ECB's interest costs while absorbing excess liquidity. The measure would also reduce losses for central banks in cash-rich countries such as Germany by lowering interest paid on banks' excess reserves accumulated through past bond buying programs. It is being reviewed as part of the ECB's monetary policy framework, with a decision expected by the autumn, although the Governing Council has yet to formally discuss it. In response, the Association of German Banks chief executive, Heiner Herringhoff, has rejected the European Central Bank's proposal to raise the bank's minimum reserve requirement from 1 to 2% of the customer deposits and certain other liabilities. He said the measure would effectively impose an additional tax on European banks by tying up liquidity, reducing profitability, and limiting their capacity to invest and lend. Herkenhofer added that the move would further weaken the global competitiveness of European banks at a time of growing geopolitical uncertainty. To discuss this, we're joined from Paris by the former advisor to the World Bank and the executive director of the EU Policy Lab at EU SGN Centre, Mr. Mayor Nicholas Fursley. Mr. Fursley, welcome to Q News. Now, if the European Central Bank goes ahead with this proposal, who stands to gain the most and who stands to lose as well?
I'm delighted to join you today. I hope for Europe's sake that they don't go ahead, because it would be a dramatically stupid, and I'm measuring my words, a stupid decision, not only stupid in itself, right? But the timing is even stupider. So in economics, we call it pro-cyclical. So what does it mean, pro-cyclical, as opposed to anti-cyclical? Something which is pro-cyclical is a policy measure which exacerbates, enhances developed existing economic trends, and usually the trends we talk about are negative. So for example, now in Germany and France, economic growth is very weak. It is not the case in other European member states, and more precisely, it is not the case in other Eurozone member states. And I'm thinking here of Poland, Greece, Spain, Ireland, Portugal, where the economy is growing fast, right? Mm-hmm. But in the big ones, and I'm speaking here about Germany, France, and Italy, the economy is growing very weakly, close to zero. So if you do so if the ECB goes ahead with the proposed changes, it will be horrible. Why? Very simply, because the end effect, the consequence of the decision, means that French, German, and Italian banks mechanically, automatically, they will lend less money to French, German, and Italian companies and consumers. And so it will exacerbate the weakness of GDP growth at the worst possible moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, could forcing the banks to hold more money in reserve end up slowing the investment and economic growth across Europe then?
Yes. Like I said, maybe it would have no or very little impact in Poland, Spain, Portugal, Greece, because they're growing fast, right? But marginally, in the big European countries, and you are right, the big ones, they matter more than the small ones, right? So Germany, France and Italy, they matter much more than the rest, right? Mm-hmm. So if they slow down, they will drag down by the sheer weight, by the size of the GDP of Germany, France and Italy, they will drag down their neighbors. But also, we have to think about global competition. Why is the timing stupid? It's not only because GDP growth is very weak in Europe, in the big European markets, but it's also because international competition is accelerating. So European corporations, and I'm thinking here about industrial firms, big industrial firms, or what is left of them in northern Italy, Western Germany, and France, they are now faced with brutally fierce competition, accelerating competition from American and Chinese companies. And their
So
market.
would it be safe to say then that the European Central Bank is prioritizing its own balance sheet over the needs of the banking sector, over the needs of Germany, France, and Spain? Or is it just simply being prudent in its monetary policy?
No, you're right. It's a selfish self-preservation, and it's not necessary. So, they've been operating with the same rules for the past 26 or 27 years. Why change now? The timing is silly, very silly. Because why? Because the Chinese and the Americans, they're loosening. So here it's called prudential rules. So these rules are part of prudential regulation mechanism, which applies to banks and insurance companies, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Americans under Trump are progressively loosening these rules. So if the Europeans tighten the rules precisely when the Americans loosen the rules, they're really shooting themselves in the foot, right? It doesn't make any sense. It is suicidal. But here I would say it's an intellectual and cultural issue. If we look at the board members of the Federal Reserve Bank, right, the central bank of America, the Fed, mm-hmm. If we look at their CVs, their resumes, they all have PhDs, summa cum laude, in economics and finance from the best universities in the world. So they're all really Yale, Wharton, Stanford, MIT graduates with PhDs. If we look at the European Central Bank, the comparison is cruel and becoming crueler. Lagarde herself, Christine Lagarde herself, the chairwoman of the European Central Bank, she's like a second-rate employment law. So her expertise is in 1970s socialist French employment law. She knows nothing about international finance and international economics. And it's even worse. Most of the other board members of the European Central Banks today, what is their CV? What is their resume? Well, most of them, they have BAs in political science, public law, or employment law. Very few of them are actually economics and finance experts. Mm-hmm. And that's why you get disastrous, silly decisions.
Well, do you feel like with all the geopolitical developments that are taking place right now, is this the right time for these tightening measures on the banking sector?
Timing is awful. So the timing is horrible, because when you have accelerating geoeconomic competition, when Chinese, American companies are becoming more aggressive, what is the fuel of that global economic competition? It's money, right? So industrial company, R&D, research, infrastructure, building a new factory, building a new plant, building a microchip, let's take, the most successful part of the world economy today. The reason why America, Taiwan, South Korea are so successful right now is advanced microchips. To build them requires tens of billions of euros and over 10, 15 years. So that money, where does it come from? It doesn't come from the sky, like, the manna from heaven, which God sent to Moses when he was crossing from Egypt to the Sinai, right? It's not like the manna from heavens. It comes from banks. So banks are the ones who give money to these big industrial plants and allowing them to invest long term. Mm-hmm. So if you squeeze the bank, if you strangle the banks at the worst possible moment, you are destroying your own industry, which is exactly what the Europeans are doing, I'm afraid.
No, that's why, the banks are facing higher costs. Should we realistically expect that those costs to be passed on to the businesses and the consumers through more expensive loans?
Yes, not only more expensive loans, but less loans. And so and smaller loans, so less loans and smaller loans. And the less loans and smaller loans part is much worse, in my opinion, than more expensive. You know what I mean? So this is really horrible. It's taxing, once again, the balance sheet of the productive part, because these banks are productive, right? Industrial companies like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Siemens are very productive. You know, they are the backbone of what is left of the European economy. If you start strangling companies like Siemens or Mercedes, you will destroy what is left of Europe's industrial heartland. And who's doing it? The people doing it are parasites, I'm afraid, to say the word. But these people, on the board of the ECB, is their BAs in social, whatever, psychology or employment law. They know nothing about the world of finance. They know nothing about the world of management. They just want to add and pile up more rules, more regulations, more règlements, more laws, strangling the European economy. And I think what we're seeing today is great, because we're seeing a brutal reaction, and unusually, because, the Association of German Banks, usually they're very polite, right? They're very polite, German, nice. But Heiner Herkenhoff today, the chief executive of the Association of German Banks, he published a very brutal statement for the first time in years, saying this is crazy. So at least, maybe it will have a positive effect, and maybe we'll see a revolt, a revolt of the private sector, who, quite frankly, they've had enough.
Well, then, do you think this proposal, going ahead with it or not, do you think it would reshape the relationship then between the European Central Bank and the commercial banks, namely of Germany, Spain and France? The locomotives of the European economy, or would it just have a slight, limited impact?
I want to believe that the ECB will not go ahead. So I want to believe that, they published that planned change in prudential regulation as a trial balloon to test the waters. And I hope that in the coming days, we'll see more forceful, strong reaction from the associations of German, French, Belgian, Italian banks, telling them we've had enough. Because, quite frankly, the GDP figures published by European countries in the past few weeks are a disaster. We're witnessing in real time, like a slow motion horror movie. And what is that slow motion horror movie? It's the deaths of the French and German car industry. So companies like Renault, Peugeot, Fiat, BMW, Mercedes, they're on the brink of collapse, of ruin.
From Paris, that was the former advisor to the World Bank and the executive director of the EU Policy Lab at the EU SCN Centre, Mr. Meher Nicholas Fursley. Mr. Fursley, thank you very much for being with us. And now we turn to a fan favourite. The attention remains focused on the 2026 World Cup. A team's value is no longer measured solely by trophies and results. The 2026 FIFA World Cup play evaluations, prize money, and global exposure are demonstrating how performance on the pitch can generate economic impact far beyond the game itself. Tonight, let's examine the financial stories behind the tournament, from Egypt's World Cup gains to the role of market value in predicting successes. Let's take a closer look. At the 2026 FIFA World Cup, some teams arrived with billion-dollar expectations, while others entered with much smaller market value and something to prove. The group stage showed that squad value can influence a team's chances, but it cannot tell the whole story. From Egypt and Morocco's progress to unexpected exits by higher value teams.
Before the first whistle of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, another competition had already begun, the race of market value. In modern football, a national team's strength is measured not only by results, but also by the combined value of its players, a figure reflecting talent, reputation, and future earning potential. During the group stage, the numbers showed a strong connection between value and performance. More than 87% of the teams that reached the round of 32 came from the tournament's highest valued squads, with 28 qualified teams ranking among the top market value nations. But the World Cup also proved that money does not guarantee success. Turkey entered the tournament with a squad valued at around 473 million euros, the highest in its group, yet failed to advance. Meanwhile, Cape Verde reached the knockout stage despite a squad value of less than 55 million euros, while Uruguay, valued at more than 359 million euros, exited early. Egypt also became part of this story, reaching the round of 32 despite being among the lower value teams in the knockout stage. For Morocco, the World Cup represents another side of football economics. After the historic 2022 run that saw the team reach the semi-finals, the national team's global profile and player valuations continued to rise, turning sporting success into commercial value. Because a World Cup run does not only change results on the pitch, it can change the value of players, teams, and entire football markets.
And for more on this, we're joined from Denver, Colorado by the Professor Vector Matheson, the Professor of Economics at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, who specializes in the economic impact of sports. Welcome to Q News, and hope you're enjoying the tournament over there. Now, the market value has become a major indicator of football strength. How reliable is it then as a measure of a national team's chances of success?
Oh, it's extremely reliable. Again, what we saw is in almost all cases, the big teams with the most valuable players, the ones that the big football clubs around the world want to buy, those are the teams that are doing well. Now, but mind you, of course, on any given day, anything can happen. So, you know, if we could just predict who was going to win games by how much value they had on the team, we wouldn't even bother playing the games. And so, of course, that's one of the great things about the World Cup, seeing the big upsets. We saw a big upset yesterday, Morocco upsetting the Netherlands, obviously Germany going out of the tournament. Those are two teams in the top 8, and they're gone already in the round of 32. It's not looking for good for England. Literally right now, the second highest value team in the world against tiny Democratic Republic of Congo. So again, the reason why we play them is because anything can happen.
Well, more than 87% of the teams that reached the round of 32 came from the highest valued squads, though. Does this prove that financial power is becoming more influential in international football, or is it just because of the 48 new World Cup format?
You know, you'll find that same pattern even in the old days, right? What we do have in the new format is we do have more teams in there with these small valuations. We have countries like Cape Verde and Curacao in there that have very small valuations. But again, even in the past, it was the Spains, the Frances, right? The Germanys, the Brazils, with the high marketed players winning the World Cups for the last several decades. So it's not not just now. But again, we can have upsets, and that's one of the great parts of the tournament is that we can't just guarantee who's going to win. And I think a lot of people have France as the favorite with both their results as a team and also the combined values of their players. But I don't think anyone thinks that France is going to win this with certainty.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you mentioned, there are teams such as Cape Verde and, I mean, Congo now is quite an obstacle to England as we speak. I mean, they're advancing despite a much lower squad value, and higher value teams like Turkey and Uruguay went back home early. Now, what explains this gap between the valuation and the performance on the pitch?
So there can be a lot of things, right? Number one can simply be that you may have a squad of highly talented players, but they didn't never come together as a team. So that's always one of the issues there. The other thing is that it's the luck of the draw, right? You can have a shot that bounces off the post rather than going in. The difference between going home and not might be a fraction of an inch, and that's not something money can buy. Again, money can buy you a better chance of winning, but money's not actually going to buy you those wins because, the smallest margin can be the difference between going home and not. We saw that, for example, with Iran. Actually went home by less than 2 inches on one offside call, right? Mm-hmm. So again, that's such a small amount that anything can happen. Now, again, the better teams are going to generate more chances, more opportunities to score those goals so that luck plays a lower role. But again, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Mm-hmm. Well, Victor, try to break it down for us. How is the market value of a national team calculated? What factors do have the biggest impact on increasing a player's or a squad's value? Are we talking about social media following? Are we talking about sponsorship deals? Are we talking about the value of the respective football associations? What is it really?
So actually, the numbers we've been talking about here today are actually what are known as transfer market values. And that's what people think a player would go for if that player was traded from one team to another. So, right, a player, say, Mo Salah could leave Liverpool and go to another team. And how much would that other team have to pay for them? And what these market values of a team is the sum of all 26 players on that squad. So, for example, in France, the estimated value is over $1 billion that if you as a club in Egypt or a club in Germany or a club in the United States tried to buy all 26 of those players to play on your professional club, it would cost you about somewhere over $1 billion. On the other hand, the smaller
But that could be quite misleading because a lot of players move around on free transfers, such as Mo Salah.
No, so that's right. So these are estimated transfer values. So these are not necessarily observed. This is what we think a team would have to pay if that player was not allowed to transfer on their own, and if you had to pay to buy that player off of another team. That would be the estimated value that player would get based on their performance in their domestic leagues and things like this. So you add up the value of all those players, and you get that. Now, mind you, there are teams such as Cape Verde, such as South Africa, where the entire transfer market value of the entire team is worth less than the average value of a single player on France or Spain or England. And so you can see what level those disparities are. But that doesn't keep a team like Cape Verde from tying mighty Spain.
Yes, well, Egypt as well. I mean, it reached the round of 32 despite being among the lower value teams in the knockout stage. But what does this tell us about the importance then of the coaching, the tactics, team structure compared to the financial resources? And when a team moves up and progresses to the next round, does it go higher in value?
So it may go higher in value, although most people think that the vast majority of players don't increase their transfer market value by just having a good World Cup. At least part of that is because the players having the best World Cups Messi, Mbappe, Haaland. These are already the greatest players in the world, and their value is already well established. You might see some very unknown players that somehow slipped under the radar of most evaluation processes, and then all of a sudden those players are more valuable. One example, who may not be more valuable as an actual player on the field, but has become much more valuable as a player in terms of sponsorship numbers, is Bonsina, and he's the goalkeeper who is for Cape Verde, who managed to stifle Spain as well as the next players the next teams he played. He's gone from 50,000 Instagram followers to 17 million in just 2 weeks by his standout performance. That might not get him a new position, for Arsenal or Liverpool. He is 40 years old after all, playing in the second division of Portugal. But it's likely to earn him at least $1 million in sponsorship money, which he would have had none of had he not had such a spectacular tournament.
So maybe individual performances can increase the value of a team. Now, what about collective performance? I mean, Morocco's recent World Cup success helped increase definitely the international attention around its players, who are already big football brands and icons as well. So do you feel that national teams can turn these individual or sporting performances and the achievements into a long-term economic value?
Oh, I think certainly they could. So again, individual players who have a breakout tournament might see some additional attention, although again, I'm somewhat skeptical of that because most of the players playing for teams, even teams that we don't consider in the top 5, but are outstanding teams like Morocco, these players are already well known by the top European clubs that can pay the big money. But you also might see that the national team itself may get a lot of additional consumer interest, right? I mean, if you go to any street anywhere in the world, you'll see people wearing Argentina jerseys, you'll see people wearing England jerseys, you'll see people wearing Brazil jerseys. But of course, that's because those countries have won World Cups and traditionally perform well. If Morocco goes all the way to the semifinals again, and maybe this is their breakthrough year where they win the whole thing, it would be the first African nation, obviously, to do that. Will we see people wearing Morocco jerseys all around the world? And of course, those sales of those Morocco jerseys lead more money back to that national federation, which can be used to pay existing players and pay for developmental programs for that next generation of great Moroccan players.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so does you've mentioned that a performance within the World Cup wouldn't directly increase players' valuations or create better opportunities for transfers. But could then that happen after the tournament is over, after the competition is over? Can the valuations change then?
So certainly they can. And again, if we see a lot of attention going to Moroccan players and that their estimated value goes up because of their performance here, that will certainly have some effect. Again, the issue here is that most professional team managers put a lot more weight on a 38-game Premier League season or a 38-game La Liga season than they place on 4 or 5 performances at the World Cup. So again, we don't see a lot of evidence of that happening, but occasionally we do. One example here in the United States, and of course I'm wearing my U.S. jersey since we play Bosnia later today. Mm-hmm. The big announcer in the United States is a guy named Alexi Lalas, and he got a shot playing in Serie A in Italy, first American to do so in 1994 because here was an unknown American player starring on the world stage. So it certainly can happen, but most of the time it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, strictly from an economic perspective, do you think national teams are becoming football assets similar to clubs, or clubs would be bigger bigger brands economically?
Probably the football clubs, the individual professional clubs, will always remain the bigger asset, simply because they have more opportunities to play on a high stage, right? We love the World Cup, but one of the things we like about it is it happens only once every 4 years, mm-hmm. So it's pretty special. Even a team that does extremely in the World Cup, say Morocco goes all the way, that's only 8 games that they're going to be playing over the course of a month. And then we kind of forget about them, whether it's Morocco or Argentina or France. But the clubs, the Paris Saint-Germains, the Liverpools, they're playing season after season, game after game. And so just much more opportunity to develop branding as well as generate revenue.
From Denver, Colorado, that was Professor Victor A. Matheson, the Professor of Economics at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. Thank you very much for joining us. And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our Economic Bulletin for today. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.